The next step is an activity of the Program for Infant-Toddler Caregivers developed collaboratively by the California Department of Education and WestEd. Infants are always learning. Learning about who they can trust. Trying new ways to use things.
Yeah, Jeremy's spinning his cup. Put your noodles on your fork.
Finding out about social rules. Exploring fantasy.
You're a dancer.
Learning is a part of everything infants do. The importance of early learning is now being shared nationwide. We have come to know how crucial early experience is to brain development. What's being widely shared with the public are many ways to help children learn. However, much of what's being recommended is adult-directed stimulation. What the infant is interested in is often left out. Cognitive research shows that infants' interests and motivation are central to their learning. So the logical next step in support of infant learning is to make sure it begins with the infant's interests. What we've learned over the last few years is that infants come into the world both competent and vulnerable. On the one hand, they're born learners. They are incredibly motivated to master language.
My daddy made my list.
He did.
What else?
Search for meaning.
That's a polar bear.
Solve problems. And practice the crawl, the walk, the run. On the other hand, infants are born dependent on adults. They need them for safety and survival, and seek them out for protection and comfort. They also depend on adults for rules of living.
Gentle with him, gentle. Another turn.
And relate to them as learning partners. To be effective partners, caregivers have to find ways to help infants increase their competence and lessen their vulnerability. Yet before taking any action, caregivers should base their efforts on what the infant is trying to learn.
Tiger.
In fact, infants have their own curriculum, which they actively pursue. It's as if even before birth, they've enrolled in 4 courses. As we'll see, infants' mastery of their courses is the foundation for developing the physical, social, language, pre-math, and pre-literacy skills they will need to succeed in school. Let's start with physical development. Infants pursue this course with exuberance.
Yeah, he's so happy. I'm gonna get you the frog.
They start out life with biologically built-in reflexes, and their ability to move naturally unfolds. They are driven to experiment with and practice large muscle skills and small muscle skills.
Turn the page. Hey, you got him on your fork.
Whatever the level of their ability, infants strive to increase their physical competence.
You have big gun?
The caregiver's job is to make it safe and easy for them to do so. Infants are constantly trying to figure out what they can do with their bodies.
You see Sage up high?
Hi.
And test how far they can go and still be safe.
I'm in Sage.
By late toddlerhood, with help and encouragement, these self-motivated learners have mastered an incredible array of the physical skills they'll use in school.
Oh, you hid like this?
But these aren't the only skills they're developing. They are also keenly interested in building social relationships.
Shinju? You see Shinju out there?
Hi.
Children start their work in this course by searching for trusting and secure connections. They naturally seek out support and expect their caregivers to be there for them.
I see you.
Each day, they work hard to maintain and deepen emotional ties.
It's a beautiful head. Yeah, trains. Look at that.
Children also rely on caregivers to provide them with a secure base for learning. In fact, relationships are where a good deal of early learning takes place.
Only got G and H.
Without this secure base, intellectual discovery would be severely limited.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
By imitating and interacting with trusted caregivers,
Sister?
young children learn to communicate, use objects, and get along with people. Skills all necessary for school success.
And roll it back?
Infants are exquisitely attuned to both the positive and negative responses they get from those they are close to.
I did it.
You did it again.
I did it again.
And use those responses to begin to define who they are.
She's been there.
Your baby's so tired.
This early development of a sense of self and social competence is crucial to all other learning.
For the hugs. Give me hugs. You want to do row? Help me, Lorelai.
Language development goes hand in hand with the growth of trusting relationships.
Hello. That's a dog. Woof, woof. He does say woof, woof.
Infants actively and continually engage in communication.
Hey. Hi, Christy. What are you doing? You over there in the house area?
And seek out ways to better understand the world.
Oh.
They're fascinated with the human voice and repeatedly imitate their caregivers' vocalizations.
Oh. Again? Someone calling again?
They
Sister?
also
Is this
practice
on the phone?
with their caregivers and by themselves rhythms of speech,
Right here? Right here.
strings of words,
Like this?
and sentences they hear,
That one again.
all important steps in building vocabulary.
Right there. Where you want to put that?
No.
No, no, no.
No.
Right there.
Through interaction with those close to them, they learn the give and take of communication and keep getting better at it.
Do you like your lunch?
I like my tuna fish.
Mm-hmm. You like to take your tuna off the bread.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You usually don't eat your bread.
No.
As they become more sophisticated with language, they start to use it to guide action.
That one on me.
Mm-hmm. Do you want it on your head or your neck?
My neck.
Children's ever-increasing mastery of language enables them to take on more and more complex social and intellectual challenges.
I would like to it.
Okay. Take your shoes off, Claire.
With regard to intellectual development, infants learn in two ways: through relationships and from making discoveries on their own.
Yeah. Pat you there.
Cognitive research shows that infants learn by observing and imitating those around them,
Night, night. On or off?
and by continually inventing new and better ways of doing things.
I'm turning it.
Starting with simple strategies such as mouthing or shaking, infants learn about an object's hardness or stickiness, and also what they can do and what they can't do with different kinds of things. They are beginning to use mathematical reasoning to classify things into groups. Through practice and play, they get good at, for example, pouring water or bouncing balls, and become confident enough to experiment, pouring balls, trying to bounce water, making brand new discoveries, and developing new strategies.
You're all wet.
By combining new strategies with familiar ones, infants build a scientific understanding of how things move and fit in space. They explore ways to use their body as a tool, or an object as a tool,
Help.
or even their caregiver as a tool.
Press the button.
They learn about the relationship between cause and effect,
Down. You want to press that one again?
and experiment with how to cause things to happen. They come to understand that people and objects still exist and can be kept in memory when they're out of sight.
Mom is going to go out for a while while you play.
Young children begin their fascination with intellectual activity at birth.
Cup.
Cups. You want
They
to put it
busy themselves trying to figure out basic principles that are the foundation of all future learning. Through their study and our assistance, they develop a complex understanding of the logic and science of the world.
on? You stacked them. You're gonna climb.
Though we've presented infant curriculum as if infants study one course at a time, we have done so only to clearly identify the content of infant learning. In truth, infants learn in a much more integrated way. They pick up many different types of information at the same time, and often switch focus from one course to another. They do this both naturally and actively. Because infants are such active learners, it may seem as if there's not a lot for caregivers to do to help them. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Another ball. Good throw. Ready?
The role of the caregiver is crucial.
Got it?
Infants need a sensitive facilitator to present learning opportunities that fit with their curriculum.
There's our ball tower over there, and there are some balls over here, and there's this one hanging, and there's some balls there.
Research shows that the most effective way for children to gain the social and intellectual competence they'll need in school is for caregivers to be responsive to their interests,
Over there?
rather than teach specific lessons.
Night, night, baby. Night, night. Night, night.
To begin with, this is done by sensitively observing and documenting the development of the children. And then by planning and setting up environments and selecting equipment
There's water.
and materials that match the children's interests.
Seen the books? She likes this picture, the baby. The baby's hand.
A big part of facilitating infant learning is for the caregiver to adapt environments and interactions to respond to the child's changing interests and needs. Observing that Christy has lost interest in the book, this caregiver follows her lead and switches to a new activity.
Here it comes, Christy.
Do you hear the leaf blower coming closer?
Adaptation also means moving from one type of facilitation, like assisting learning about size, weight, and gravity,
Hold my ball and hold you two? Oh, I'll have my arms fly.
to another, experiencing social connectedness.
You want me to hold you two, Sage? Yeah, we'll wait for the leaf blower to move away.
Both essential life lessons.
What's this, Christy?
When caregivers adapt, what they are actually doing is making the most of learning opportunities.
And another book. And another book.
They see what the children are interested in and find ways to enrich it.
He's in bed. And another book. So many books here, Christy.
That's what you do, you turn.
An often ignored part of the caregiver's role is the support of child-initiated practice and repetition. Through practice and repetition, this child is learning physical skills,
Another wrench.
vocabulary, and the give and take of social interaction. One way to support practice is to not interrupt an infant who has started doing something over and over again. This communicates both acceptance and encouragement of the child's passion for mastery.
Uh-oh, I'm gone.
Infants love to repeat what they see and hear.
I'm gone.
She ate her bread.
I'm gone.
Your salami's all gone.
A caregiver supports this imitation by repeating the children's actions and words,
Now you have cheese.
I'm gone. I'm gone.
and by giving them time to imitate one another.
I'm gone. I'm gone.
When caregivers give children the luxury of practice and repetition, children are able to master skills and use that mastery as a jumping-off point
Looks like the
for
baby's
further
holding a
learning.
bubble. Maybe he's holding a bubble in hands. This baby's sucking her thumb. Hey, Harmony.
To expand learning, a caregiver needs to provide the amount of novelty and complexity the child is ready for.
Throw those balls. You can squeeze this ball. Soft. Bounces. Gonna keep these balls
Caregivers
right
can
here.
elaborate on a child's play,
There they go. Can you get it, Harmony? Shake, shake, shake.
pose problems,
Is that one gonna fit? Will it fit?
introduce more complexity,
Not going down.
and add challenging
Not going
materials.
down. I think it's too big. Will that one work? Will that one fit? That one fits.
Yeah, we're gonna have lots of fun.
Ways to expand early communication
We're going to play.
are to use words and simple phrases and to respond to the child's sounds.
What else? Yeah.
As infants grow older, the caregiver can add information that relates to the child's words and actions and model how to say things.
Water. It's all wet.
Be tasty.
Well-done expansions build on what's familiar to children so that they can use current knowledge as the basis for further learning.
Is this tea or some coffee? Harmony's gonna drink it up. That one? Ooh, you can blow in it.
Expansion helps children develop new and more advanced ways of thinking and acting.
Just gonna put the top on. Harmony wants to.
As we've just seen, good caregivers take their lead from the child.
More.
They adapt both the environment and their actions to the children's needs and interests.
I have so many of these balls.
They show their respect for the children